Saudi Arabia. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism, and what a fantastic group we've got assembled for you tonight. With just about 2 weeks to go until those vital elections, Tammy Bruce is with us, Jason Chaffetz is here, Kennedy is here, and Ann Coulter too. But let's start with that caravan of Central American immigrants. The numbers have grown as it attempts to pass through Mexico into the United States. And here's William Lajeunesse with a quick update.
Well, Steve, the immigrants have been walking really about the last 12 hours. We just had a very late afternoon thunderstorm. You can see some are still taking cover under the trees and under any canopies they can find. But the real story right now is Mexican President Peña Nieto. Is he telling the United States one thing, that is that he is doing everything to stop this caravan, but also telling Guatemala and Honduras something else, and that is offering safe passage, according to the Mexican press, to the immigrants. And the Interior Department just saying right now the priority is shelter and assistance for the migrants. So they will spend tonight here in Tapachula. They're also seeking a 45-day transit visa, if you will, to go through Mexico to the U.S. border. Also, we don't know what's going to happen when they get there. Under the agreement that the U.S. has reportedly signed with Mexico, two things are different now. Number one, people are required to file for asylum here in Mexico. And if they fail to do that, the U.S. can turn away women and children. Secondly, we've always taken custody of these individuals, put them in custody, given them due process, and then sent them back by airplane to Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. Under this new agreement, allegedly, the Safe Third Country Harbor Agreement, we can deport them to Mexico. Of course, Mexico's concern is they're going to have basically these Central American slums in Tijuana or Juarez. Those are some of the things we don't know, and I've asked the administration, and we have not gotten a straight answer. What I can tell you right now is we've talked to the UN High Commissioner on Refugees. They're going to apply the same international standard, i.e. that the individuals here will have to prove that they have a credible fear of persecution due to race, nationality, political views. And if they fail to do that, they could be deported. Don't know if that standard is going to hold or not. What I can tell you, this story is definitely not over. Steve, back to you.
William, thanks so much for that. You're doing great work for us down there. With me now, syndicated columnist Ann Coulter, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network. Kennedy, former Utah Congressman, Fox News contributor, and author of the book The Deep State: How an Army of Bureaucrats Protected Barack Obama and is Working to Destroy the Trump Agenda. Jason Chaffetz. By the way, why didn't we mention Ann Coulter's book, Resistance is Futile? We need to do that.
I was wondering that.
And from exactly, there you go. We'll get to it later. From New York, Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Tammy, I'm going to bring you in first, since you're all the way over there and we're sitting at the table. I just want to start any discussion on immigration with a really important point for me personally, which is that basically I am pro-immigration. My family fled communism in Hungary, some of them literally climbing over fences, as we've seen, as refugees from the communist invasion. And now I'm an immigrant here twice over. So I'm pro-immigration, but it's got to be controlled if there's going to be consent for immigration. It's quite clear that immigration has been out of control, and these scenes that we're witnessing, it just totally emphasize that point about control. And I don't understand how anyone can look at those pictures and not be incredibly alarmed about what's going on.
Yeah, look, the lack of real policy here in the United States, the lack of controls, the effective, through the Obama administration, the effective open border has encouraged this now for half a generation. And you can see some of these pictures, the children, people huddling, the dangers involved. Effectively, it's an abusive process that exists because we had a system that thought that there was some political gain to be had by having these images, that they could be used politically. It's just like with the Kavanaugh situation. Other people's lives do not matter to the establishment. You see this framework. We've, of course, abandoned policies for Central and South America to deal with corrupt regimes where there's horrible dynamics that these people are fleeing. But the solution that Trump has come up with is a good one. That if you have this a safe nation that will accept refugee status for you, then you're not going to get it at the United States border. And that's important. If this was really about refugee framework, the international scene recognizes this as the very next safe country. And for these individuals, it's Mexico. It is not the United States. So at least there's a framework of a structure. The president's moving, and he was right in his tweet that they could solve some of this in an hour if the Democrats weren't obstructing. But like with DACA, they really don't care about these people. They want to show this chaos. They want to try to blame it on Trump. And it's not going to work this time.
Let's pick up, Jason, on that Mexico point. I think one of the things that's interesting about this is the seemingly the changed attitude of Mexico. The fact that we've had this new trade deal negotiated, the actions they're taking do seem to be more cooperative.
Well, we're about to find out, maybe or maybe not. You know, the United States of America legally and lawfully brings in about 1 million people a year, more than every other country combined. And this surge is one of the worst things that I've ever seen the Democrats encourage. It started with Barack Obama when he changed the parameters of asylum. He basically said, come here and we can change the way you can make this claim. And you started to see these people come and they are raped, they're pillaged, they're taken advantage of. It's human trafficking, and yet the Democrats, they seem to think that's okay. They should be saying, no, if you want to claim asylum and you want to do it the right way with the United States, then go to the local embassy in Honduras or Guatemala. And safe third country, which we have as a country is supported for decades, means you go to the next country and stay there. Don't leapfrog to try to get to the United States.
It's you're right. I mean, the Democrats hate it when you say, oh, you're for open borders. They know we're not for open borders, but here's an opportunity for them to show that by actually saying this is totally unacceptable. And I haven't seen a single Democrat speak up against it. And speaking of which, I just want to play a clip today from LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, which just because it's an argument he put out there that I think is, it reveals something about how the Democrats see this. Let's just watch.
Fundamentally, what this administration doesn't get, like so many of its plans, they know what they're against, they don't know how to solve the problem. Investing, for instance, in stabilizing the economies of the countries in Central America is a great way to cut off the supply. They think a wall will keep people out when they don't go to the root of the problem.
So that is so exactly wrong. I just wanted to call it out and just explain to our audience. Of course, it's true that the root problem is the fact that you've got these failed states failing even more. But the idea that investing, which is code for giving them more money, is going to solve the problem is so ridiculous. It is about encouraging them to get richer in a sustainable way. And that means the institutions of a market economy in a free society, property rights, the rule of law, an independent judiciary, all the things that are the basis for countries to grow and get richer and be stable, not just handing them over money. And then he says it's not about the wall, which brings me to you, Ann Coulter, because there's nothing in that it just totally captures this sort of attitude that, like, we have to say anything at all as long as we can get to a point of saying we're against the wall.
Yes, and we have to keep admitting everyone who runs across the border. I've heard a lot of Democrats say that, well, first we just have to solve all these other countries' problems. No, that's precisely why we don't want these countries coming here. And I mean, to compare it to your relatives escaping communist Hungary, we don't have a Holocaust going on right now. We don't have a Soviet Union. There is not a potato famine. In each one of those cases, you're talking about some unusual circumstance. It wasn't like how the Irish always lived. We're always starving to death. No, there was a potato famine because the potato crop died. You were subject to communism. Adolf Hitler rose up. This is how these people live all the time. We're not going to correct thousands of years of culture. I mean, yes, we wish them luck. We want to help them. But to say that we have to change cultures that have been around for 1,000 years, and they've always been heavily corrupt, heavily poor, it's not going to happen. You may as well say, first we have to colonize Mars, and then you can build a wall.
I would say that it's to be honest, I'd say it's less a cultural thing. It's the institutional thing. Like I was saying, they don't have the institutional framework to support the kind of...
That could well be, but it's been 1,000 years. We're not going to... America isn't going to solve that.
Well, that's certainly true. Kennedy, what's your take?
I agree with that, and I think there's a lot of pressure for this direct investment, which is futile. And the thing that really pulls people out of poverty, and in countries like that, there is more extreme poverty, certainly, than there is in Mexico and the United States, is free trade and actually opening up markets and, you know, and not investing in, but capitalizing on the natural resources that they have in addition to the labor that they've got. Part of the problem you have here is, and this goes back to some of your former colleagues, is we have so many discrepancies in immigration, and it is so confusing. And legal immigration it's really laughable, and it's incredibly difficult. And so that has created this impasse that Republicans and Democrats love, because they don't want to work together on immigration. Republicans and Democrats love these pictures because they rile up the completely torn apart bases on each side. And if you had less chaos, and if you had more rule of law, and people knew exactly how they could get into this country and had more incentive to go back when they were done working seasonally, it would be much better for businesses and individuals and families who are being torn apart. And that means that ICE agents can't go after bad people getting in this country because they're essentially having to look after these overrun detention
I think that's exactly right. It's what we were talking about with Tammy at the beginning, is this order and control, which is totally absent. Look, we're running out of time now, but we're going to come back to it a bit later on. In particular, I'm interested in this bill that that I keep hearing about, this Kevin McCarthy bill. Is it any good? Will it ever happen? We can get to that later on. But now, what's coming up next? Who is to blame for angry mobs that we keep hearing about too? Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd were talking about it today, and surprise, surprise, they both got it completely wrong. We'll tell you why, and we'll talk about it with the panel next. But first, as the first line of the president's message for the midterms.
This November, vote for jobs, not mobs.
Jobs, not mobs. And so it was just a matter of time before the president's opponents in the media started to push back on his argument. And sure enough, we saw that this morning on the Sunday shows with NBC's Chuck Todd and CNN's Jake Tapper making the same point in an uncannily similar way.
This is Nancy Pelosi in Miami facing a mob, and Mitch McConnell in Kentucky facing a mob.
Look at this piece of Pelosi right here. You don't belong here, communist. Get the out of here.
We've had a couple of mob scenes where leaders of the Democrats and of the Republicans were both publicly harassed. We have angry people left and right. This isn't made up. It's ugly. It's bad. And I think leaders of both parties need to accept that.
Looks like they both got the same memo from anti-Trump HQ. You can see what Chuck and Jake are trying to do. They want to look neutral. This anger, these hate-filled mobs, it's not just the Democrats. Look, Republicans do it too. It's both sides. Wow, would you believe it? Chuck and Jake are going with President Trump's Charlottesville defense. There's blame on both sides. Well, no, actually, as I said at the time, it wasn't both sides then, and it's not both sides now. Chuck, how many times have you seen a Republican member of Congress inciting harassment like this?
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Jake, where's the Republican senator calling for behavior like this?
Please don't just come here today and then go home. Go to the Hill today. Get up and please get up in the face of some Congress people.
And can either of you imagine Paul Ryan talking about people, fellow Americans, like this?
We have to have total clarity about what we do when it comes to everything. A woman's right to choose, whether it's about immigration, whether it's about gun safety, whether it's about climate. We didn't even talk about climate. And if there's some collateral damage for some others who do not share our view, well, so be it.
Collateral damage, my God. Never mind a lack of civility. That is the language of civil war from Pelosi. So no, Chuck, and no, Jake, it is not both sides. It is the left that's driving the hate and intolerance and violence and rage. And they have been ever since 2016, when the American people had the temerity to vote for real change and reject the failed elitist establishment that you and your friends in the elitist media seem to love so much, even though for decades this same establishment, with its pompous norms and corrupt civility, ruined the lives of millions of working Americans. This rage and hate and intolerance on the left, it is all part of the moral collapse of the Democratic Party. They once stood for working people, but now they're for uncontrolled immigration that hurts the working class most. They used to be against big money in politics, but now they hoover it up from the likes of Tom Steyer and George Soros. They say they're for women, but make excuses for their own abusers, whether it's Keith Ellison in Minnesota or Bill Clinton in the Oval Office, as we saw yet again from Hillary this week. And then perhaps the most humiliating moral collapse of all, Elizabeth Warren, who once made a compelling and substantive case against crony capitalism, now blundering into a risible mess of her own making as she abandons populism for vapid and divisive identity politics, knowing that's the only way to make it as a Democrat today. What a pathetic spectacle. It's now time for the sincere and decent left, populists like Bernie Sanders and Tim Ryan and Ro Khanna and Tulsi Gabbard, who may have some wrong ideas but at least actually care about the lives of working Americans, to get the hell out of a Democratic Party that is literally demoralized. Tell me what you think of that at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, I wrote a book on mobs and the liberal mobs, and you're absolutely right. Both, I mean, in their behavior and their approach to things, how they gin up their base and use, metaphors and images, logic doesn't work on a mob. They want something short and simple that will send them to the barricades. Every presidential assassination attempt, at least that was based on politics in U.S. history, was by a leftist of some sort, communist, anarchist, or just your standard Democrat, like the two women who took a shot at Jerry Ford. He's a frightening character. I was so struck by the alleged mob I kept hearing all over. Oh, we finally found a mob. It was this mob against Nancy Pelosi. It's so unusual. I think, like a lot of people, I thought, these are Democrats pretending to be Republicans. And then on closer examination, no, it was angry Cuban Republicans in Florida. And as I was just saying in the last segment, there are cultural differences.
Right. Tammy, what's your take? Let's just look at the broader point about the moral heart of the Democrats. It just seems to have completely gone. It's just power for its own sake, right?
Well, look, I think that the difference is that we saw a hologram, and we were told that there was a heart in the Democrats. Having come from the left, I can tell you that this has been intrinsic in most of what they've done, and I would caution you. And it's like, you're a good guy, and you're thinking that Bernie Sanders means well and Tulsi Gabbard means well. But in fact, I think that whether it's Elizabeth Warren or Jerry Brown or others, that it's always about, watch what they do, not what they say. And I don't think that this, in fact, is a change for them. It's just simply the curtain has been pulled back. That now there is the veneer. The veneer is gone because of the level of desperation. They've had the media on their side from the beginning for them, right? For generations. The ability to control the communication in the media about who they are and what they are has been eliminated. And as a result, that's added to their chaos. So as someone who is, of course, a community organizer for the left, I would suggest to everyone that this is not some new collapse. This is who they've always been. This is what has been running the country when a Democrat has been president, with the exception even to some degree of Bill Clinton, who actually liked governing. But underneath that was the rot of the fraud of what the Democrats were always bringing. He was a feminist, and he'd go to church with the Bible, and then look at what it is they were doing. This is who the Democrats have been. It is more extreme now, and it's not going to change. It's not like, oh, we can get good Democrats in. I'm afraid, Steve, really, this is over for them. That Donald Trump is an example of, not necessarily a Republican, but of the populist framework, with a president who likes the American people and is going to do the right thing. And fortunately for us, it's the conservative ideal and the free market that improves people's lives. And we've got to, I think, watch him on other issues. But that's what I think we've got here.
So you tried to work with these people in the House.
There are some good, decent people, but the difference, as you pointed out, Steve, is the leadership within the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
They're inciting violence. They're inciting these mobs, and they're acting upon it. It wasn't too long ago, one of my colleagues and very good friend, Steve Scalise, had an assassination attempt when a man with a gun is shooting at him at a ball game. And for these leaders to go out there and embrace the resistance movement, this scorched earth that says,
right. It's this
let's
right
go
from
take everybody.
Day one, right? The resistance. Exactly.
That's what they want. That's it. Because they don't have policies to run on. They couldn't believe that Donald Trump became the president of the United States. They lost their heads. And now the only thing they want is chaos, So they say, well, we have to have a change. They don't have ideas to run on. What they run on is resistance and this mob to try to have this scorched earth so that America will look at this and say we need a change.
And I think, Kennedy, the other bit, I just want to get you to respond on the identity politics bit, because I thought the way that Warren thing, okay, we can laugh and it's a joke and all the rest of it, the DNA test, but it tells you something. That actually, to get anywhere, you've got to go with this identity politics thing. That's
and I know people who are from Latin America who are really offended by what she did, and the fact that she's been using this stolen valor and cultural appropriation to get ahead in her career, as opposed to having, you know, a merit-based law career, which the Democratic Party right now. It's not merit-based, certainly. It's all about this hyperbole, and they've run out of ideas. You know, and Anne's right. You can't rationalize with a mob, but there's also no logical chain laid out that if you start with us here, we will get you there. Resistance is not enough. And that doesn't feed people, that doesn't get people promotions, that doesn't send kids to college. It really doesn't. And that was a turning point for a critical part of the country that had completely disavowed identity politics because it had done nothing for them for decades.
And now they're bringing it's the center. Yes,
Can
go
I
for it,
just add one thing? Is that when Hillary said, and this is key, that we can have civility again when we win. And what she's saying is, like any batterer, that if you comply and you do what we say, we'll stop hurting you. That was that talk about the compulsion to confess, right? That was what her message was. If you do what we want, we'll stop doing this.
Great point.
The American people cannot allow that to work. They can't allow that to work.
I know. Great point. I love that point. It's great. And by the way, it's not just resistance is enough. Resistance is futile. That's the point we need to make with Anne sitting there. All right. Up next, midterm madness with Tammy, Jason, Kennedy, and Anne. So many issues, so little time, but we're going to try and squeeze it all in. See, it's just a couple of weeks away, and we're going to try and cover a number of the big issues in the next few minutes in a little game called Midterm Madness. Okay, let's start with you, Tammy. The president is giving out extremely confident vibes. Look at this tweet just from today. Best job numbers in the history of our great country, exclamation point. Many other things likewise. So why wouldn't we win the midterms? So there's the question for you, Tammy. Why wouldn't the Republicans win?
Well, look, especially for the House, of course, these are local races. They're based on whether or not how charismatic your candidate is, where the money is, how they're doing with their own fundraising, how committed the RNC is, if the president is visiting, local scandals, etc. But the bottom line is this election is about the economy, and it's about whether or not those candidates are also embracing and supporting the president, if they're talking about that, if they're making that clear for their local community. Now, of course, we have national media and all of that, but the fact is that it took Kavanaugh and that exposure of the Democrats being a mob in the Senate to wake people up, because our biggest problem here is perhaps the success of the president, because this is our natural state, but it's only natural when government's off our back, regulations are drawn down, and Americans begin to think, well, this is normal. But no, not really, because the Democrats, of course, don't like this dynamic, and they work to make it a problem. So whether or not local candidates are able to convey that to voters, what their get-out-the-vote effort is like, because the president, while he's not on the ballot, they need to argue in many ways. This is part B of the Reformation. So those are the dynamics, but everyone must, in fact, stick on the economy, and we should be fine if all of those elements come together.
That's really important. By the way, those mechanics really matter. The Trump campaign did very well on a lot of that in 2016, which is underreported. So, Kennedy, you're interested in highlighting an issue which is not being highlighted, which is the deficit.
No one's talking about it. They're all addicted to spending. It is this massive trough, and everyone in Washington, no offense, but you're not there anymore, so you can agree with me on this.
I'm agreeing with you,
They
100%.
are piglets, and they rush to the trough. And every once in a while, you know, the president has his nickel plan where he wants federal agencies to cut 5% of their budget. That's great. It would save $70 billion. Our deficit for this year alone is $779 billion. It's not getting any better. It has increased since 2016. And we have to tackle non-discretionary spending, because discretionary spending, that's all well and good. The military eats up a lot of that, but it's the non-discretionary stuff that is causing us to borrow so much money. With the tax cuts, you need spending cuts in order to have long-term economic health, and neither party wants to do that. And that is what kills freedom. Steve Hilton, I love freedom.
There you go, and I think we'll all go along with that. And I think that you're right. It's very important. It's not being discussed. But another big issue, we've already talked about it. There's a particular aspect I want to bring up, which is immigration. So it's weird. There's this Kevin McCarthy bill, which, as far as I can make out, the only person I've heard talk about it is weirdly is Newt Gingrich. I keep seeing Newt Gingrich go on about the Kevin McCarthy bill. We're putting a graphic up of what is Build the Wall, Enforce the Law Act. What does this mean? Does it have any relevance to how people should vote?
Well, everything you've talked about just reminds me Republicans don't deserve to win, but the country doesn't deserve Democrats to win. Right. Yeah, I mean, it means Republicans are running for election. Therefore, they start talking about immigration. I mean, with this caravan marching to the border and the president is tweeting about jobs. Yeah, okay, jobs are important. Can you do something about the caravan? It seems to me, I mean, if he stops the caravan, then people like me are going to say, why didn't you stop the last 6 caravans? Wow, you do have the power to stop it. If he doesn't stop it, he's dead. What was the Republicans' plan? Tammy mentioned Kavanaugh, of course, that's been a big shot in the arm. What was Mitch McConnell's plan for winning this midterm election? Let's hope a Supreme Court nominee retires and Democrats will falsely accuse him of gang rape? That was your plan?
All right, so let's see, Jason, if you can make the positive case. There's a column in the New York Times today which was looking ahead to the frightening prospect in their eyes of the Republicans actually winning and increasing majority in the Senate and keeping control of the House, and all these terrible things at the end of the world if that happened. What's the positive case? What can we look forward to?
I think Kennedy's right. Republicans abandoned the whole idea of fiscal discipline. They lost that mantle, and they have the opportunity to gain it back, because I am a deficit hawk, and it drives me nuts that we're racking this up. Go ahead and cut taxes, but you got to cut spending as well, and you got to tackle entitlements. I also agree with Ann here, because Kevin McCarthy is the majority leader. The majority leader is the one that determines which bills come up on the floor of the House, not the Speaker of the House. So why not do that over the last 2 years? And guess what? You're still in session. If you wanted to bring it up, you could call everybody back into session and vote on it, well, tomorrow. But of course they're going to do it. We're going to do that in the future, but I do hope they do it. I think you're going to have tax reform 2.0. I do think that's a positive thing. I think they can make that more permanent. I do think they can deal with entitlements. They've done a good job there. I think foreign policy is going well. We buoyed up the military. That's all well and good. And I hope there's some other things that are actually, I think, very bipartisan, like criminal justice reform, that right after, I think Republicans can lead on, that would surprise most Americans and would make this country an actual safer place.
And honestly, though, to Ann's point, just not having the Democrats. It's that's a bonus.
Now remember, if the Democrats win, like Maxine Waters becomes the chairman of financial services.
Can I just add in?
I know you want to get in.
Yeah, just
very quickly.
Real quick. Just let's remember, what's it been? 19 months, right? This is a generational change we've got to make. The president, with everything against him, he's been personally responsible, really, for all the good news. The fact is that he needs more people in Congress who support him. Getting rid of the swamp is going to take more time, even past his 2 terms. Yeah. And we've got to recognize this. But this is not a one-term, one-effort thing, and then you go home.
Oh my gosh, no.
This continues on, and these conversations are important, so we know where we need to head.
Great point. Totally agree. Sorry to... I knew we wouldn't have enough time. Anyway, next, Swamp Watch takes on the most corrupt member of Congress. Who is it? We'll show you after the break. Look, you've heard me say many times before that the whole rotten swamp of politics is institutionally corrupt. And so in one sense, pretty much everyone on the ballot in a couple of weeks is swampy to some degree. But tonight, we bring you a profile in corruption that's in a swamp of its own. If you live in New Jersey, watch this before you vote. If you have friends or family in New Jersey, tell them to watch this before they vote, because New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez is tonight's Swamp Watch. Okay, where to begin? We could dedicate an entire show to the swampiness of Bob Menendez, but we'll just focus on the lowlights. Menendez sits on a number of powerful Senate committees, including the Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs Committee, the Finance Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, all of which have brought him a huge number of conflict donations. Just this election cycle, he's pocketed $850,000 from the real estate industry and nearly $500,000 from securities and investment companies, all of them buying influence with a senator who explicitly regulates those industries. On top of that, Menendez's chief of staff for 10 years was Michael Hutton, who went on to become a lobbyist for the infamous firm Capital Counsel. While working there, Hutton represented a number of clients, including Beacon Capital Partners, the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts, and Oak Tree Capital Management, all of them beneficiaries of Hutton's ties to a member of the Senate Housing and Banking Committee. But the senator's swampy ties to lobbyists go much deeper than former staffers. Just since November 2016, lobbyists and their family members have given Menendez over $200,000 for his re-election campaign. $48,000 of that came from Greenberg Traurig, a firm that has earned over $600,000 lobbying on behalf of the Mexican government, and $400,000 lobbying for Turkey in 2018. How is that relevant? Oh, no big deal. It's just that Menendez is the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He's also brought in $28,000 from Brownstein Hyatt, which has earned $350,000 this year lobbying for the government of India, and $300,000 for Saudi Arabia. Yes, you heard that right. While the Democrats attack President Trump over his handling of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi, their most senior elected official on foreign policy is handling campaign cash from Saudi Arabia's lobbyists. By the way, what the hell is the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or any member of Congress for that matter, doing, taking any money at all from lobbyists for foreign governments? We're going to keep campaigning on that until it's totally banned. Anyway, back to Menendez. His swamp record amounts to more than conflict and lobbyist donations, much more. In 2015, he was actually indicted by the Obama administration on federal corruption charges. You see, Menendez had a friend named Salomon Melgen, a wealthy doctor who took the senator on free rides on his private jet, including trips to luxury resorts in Florida, Paris, and the Dominican Republic, where he reportedly received 19 free stays at Melgen's private villa. And that's not all. Melgen also gave around $600,000 to super PACs to help make sure Menendez won his re-election bid in 2012. In return, Menendez apparently helped 3 of Melgen's foreign-born girlfriends get visas to the United States. He also tried to help Melgen settle an $8.9 million Medicare payment dispute, at one point asking then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to help out. Menendez also reached out to top State Department officials, urging them to enforce a post-security contract with the Dominican Republic that would benefit Melgen's company. Here's the shocking part. During the investigation into Menendez's corruption charges, the Supreme Court handed down a disastrous decision, overturning the public corruption conviction of a former governor, a decision which made it much harder to convict government officials for bribery. Menendez's attorneys were thrilled, and sure enough, after 2 months of deliberation in his corruption trial, the jury was deadlocked and the Menendez corruption case ended in a mistrial. He was not acquitted. Then, with the criminal case over, the Senate Ethics Committee brought its own investigation, which resulted in a severe letter of admonition, saying Menendez knowingly and repeatedly accepted gifts of significant value from a donor, adding, "Your assistance to Dr. Melgen under these circumstances demonstrated poor judgment, and it risked undermining the public's confidence in the Senate. As such, your actions reflected discredit upon the Senate." You can say that again, and now members of his own party basically are. His reputation